Okay, hi everyone from part 1, welcome to part 2.
Since Germany's military had to be reduced, Hitler could no longer remain a soldier after the war, but he kept working for the army as an informant. After the war,
Oh,
communists
I
in
didn't know
Germany had
that.
attempted a revolution, and the government was worried about communism in general. So Hitler was tasked with infiltrating and reporting on any new political parties that could pose a communist threat. A new party called the German Workers' Party threw up a whole bunch of red flags, so Hitler went along to one of their meetings, but found that they weren't communist at all. They were extreme right and shared many of his extreme beliefs, so he left the army and signed up to join the party. His fantastic speaking abilities impressed the party's leadership and supporters, and he very quickly rose to the top. He decided the party needed a makeover, so he renamed it to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazi for short, and he gave it a new color scheme. The Nazis weren't very specific on policy, but Hitler made extravagant promises to return Germany to its former glory by undoing the Treaty of Versailles and reuniting all ethnic Germans into one nation. He also said that only pure Aryan people should be allowed to be citizens and that all Jews would lose their citizenship. These ideas were already common in extreme right politics, but what set the Nazis apart was Hitler himself, and they quickly became the leading party on the extreme right. Many of the political parties in Germany at the time had paramilitary wings, and the Nazis were no different. Hitler set up the very descriptive Whole Protection Detachment, later changed to the very delightful Gymnastic and Sports Division, and finally settling on the ominous Storm Detachment, or SA for short.
The Stormtrooper. I think they were called Stormtroopers, which, as a Star Wars fan, it's funny. Man, I think... Okay, I have no, evidence backing this up, but I think George Lucas might have, been inspired by Hitler and World War II throughout Star Wars. I see a lot of similarities, even Palpatine's rise to power as Chancellor, having an army of stormtroopers. Again, I'm just saying this off the top of my head. I don't have any interviews, I don't have any videos or clips backing these thoughts up. I'm just... If it isn't, there's just a lot of coincidences, right? Sorry. I used to be a huge fan of Star Wars.
Their job was to defend Nazi party meetings and intimidate political opponents, and they would frequently engage in battles with communists on the streets. Since the Allies had demanded a reduction in Germany's military size, many trained soldiers were left unemployed. They liked the Nazi ideology, and it was only natural for them to join the SA, which grew larger and larger over time.
Oh wow, I did not know that. There's a lot that I'm not knowing, that I find interesting. Yeah, I think someone in my World War II video commented Hitler really hated communism, which is now I'm starting to see why. It's I was oh, what if Hitler and Stalin just got along? It's well, actually it would have never happened because Hitler always hated Stalin and communism and that whole ideology. So I definitely see that now. Also just seeing okay, that explains how the Nazis grew so big, yeah. So many free soldiers just decided, hey, we'll just join this, we like it, and... Eesh.
The new democratic government that formed after World War I was pretty weak and ineffective. In order to pay reparations to the Allies, it started printing more money. The problem is that printing money doesn't actually give a country more money, it just makes money less valuable. So as the country printed more and more money, it became worth less and less, and the currency crashed. In 1919, $1 was worth about 4 German marks. By December 1923, $1 was equal to 4.2 trillion marks. The price of bread rose to 200 billion marks. Banknotes became worthless. Unsurprisingly, in such an economic crisis, Germany struggled to pay the Allies. The French were pissed about this, so they occupied the Ruhr, an area full of factories, and took the economic output from the area as payment. They treated the German civilians badly, and in total, approximately 130 Germans were killed during the occupation. Germans were furious, and Hitler and the Nazis thought that now would be a great time to lead a revolution. In November 1920...
It's hilarious that... Yeah, Hitler... I could see that, yeah. Germany really did get punished in a way. I don't think any of the other losers of World War I did. I guess since it makes sense, they were the biggest aggressor. Even though they weren't a part of the start of the war, they went all in, and yeah, everyone's just viewed them as the big bad guy. They really got villainized in that conflict. So yeah, it's almost hard not to say yeah, Germany would do something right because of just the way they were treated afterwards.
23, inspired by something a certain bold Italian man did a year earlier, Hitler stormed a meeting at a beer hall and called for an uprising against the government.
He got arrested.
With his supporters, he marched on the streets of Munich, hoping the police would join his side. They did not.
And he went to prison.
Hitler was put on trial for treason. He could have been sentenced to life, but the right-wing judges thought he was a pretty cool guy. Hitler knew the judges and knew that they would be lenient, so he took the opportunity to make impassioned speeches during the trial. And in the end, he was sentenced to just 5 years in prison, of which he only served 9 months. And when I say prison, it was more like a pleasant hotel stay where he had plenty of time to write a book. The whole affair was covered by the media nationwide, and it made Hitler famous. Hitler and his extreme message were now known throughout Germany, but the everyday German still didn't care much for him. In the 1928 election, the Nazis only won about 2% of the vote. Many were still intimidated by all the violence and the shouting and how unpolitician-like he was, but a new economic crisis would change all of that. To help Germany pay its reparations, America agreed to give it loans. In October 1929, the Wall Street crash happened, and America wanted its money back. The economic strain this put on an already struggling Germany was severe. Unemployment skyrocketed, poverty was widespread, and Germans were sick of it. It was clear that the newly formed democracy wasn't working. In the face of crisis, Germans began moving to the political extremes. If you were German and wanted change, your choices now were either the communists or the Nazis. Hitler claimed that he was the only one who could return Germany to its former glory. The Nazi Party used propaganda to make Hitler seem like a great and powerful...
Yes, Nazi propaganda might be one of the greatest in history. Like, I believe... Was it Joseph Goebbels responsible for the Nazi... Wait. Let me Google this. Who was responsible for Nazi propaganda? Joseph Goebbels or Goebbels? Either way, I think I was right on that. But yeah, he knew what he was doing. The guy could like spin. I think there's a movie, like I forgot what the Nazi movie is. It's called, but yeah, point is it goes to show the power of propaganda and just how it could turn so many people for you. Like, the Nazis were masters of propaganda, is really what I'm just trying to get at, you know?
Man, and they gave the German people a scapegoat to blame for all their suffering. The promise of a single strong dictator was a breath of fresh air for Germans after years of failing democracy. Some bought into his extreme ideology. Some didn't agree with the racism, but were willing to vote for him anyway. Many didn't know much about politics at all, but just got caught up in the hype. Election after election, the Nazis became more and more popular, until in 1932, they became the biggest party in the German parliament. Hitler came to truly believe that he was some sort of great, destined savior of Germany. He turned megalomaniac. He decided to run for president, and did surprisingly well, but still lost to the extremely popular World War I general, Paul von Hindenburg. Since he was now the leader of the biggest party, though, he demanded President Hindenburg make him chancellor. But Hindenburg was reluctant, seeing that Hitler was clearly such a big racist. Industry leaders urged Hindenburg to give Hitler the chancellorship, fearing the rising support for communism, and leader of the Center Party von Papen, who had been secretly negotiating with Hitler, said to Hindenburg, "How about we make Hitler chancellor on the condition that I get to be vice-chancellor, and most government jobs go to us moderate conservatives? That way, I'll get to keep my power. I mean, we'll get to keep our power, and we'll control Hitler like he's our angry little puppet."
Okay, yes, I did not know this, but we obviously know that Hitler could not be controlled at all, but it's interesting seeing this political maneuvering, and let's see how Hitler gets out of it.
What could possibly go wrong? As it turned out, everything. Hitler became Chancellor of Germany in January 1933, but he was not yet a dictator. In February, the German parliament building was set on fire. Historians still aren't sure who did it, and many suspect the Nazis did it themselves, but Hitler blamed the communists, and he convinced President Hindenburg to sign an emergency decree allowing him to imprison all communists and other political opponents. Communists and others were sent off to the first concentration camp in Dachau. At this time, the elderly President Hindenburg passed away, giving Hitler the perfect opportunity. He introduced a law to Parliament that would allow him to make all future laws and decisions entirely on his own. With his political opponents imprisoned and the SA intimidating others, Hitler's law passed. Just 2 months after becoming Chancellor, Hitler was now a dictator. He still had one problem. The leader of the SA wanted the SA to take over the job of the regular German army, and the German army didn't like that idea. Hitler needed to maintain the support of his professionally trained German army, more so than his rough and rowdy SA. So one night in June 1934, he had Röhm and many other of his own SA officers rounded up and murdered. While he was at it, he took the opportunity to brutally settle some personal scores as well. Politicians who had disagreed with him in the past, reporters who had printed negative articles about him, one guy who did absolutely nothing, they thought he was someone else. In some cases, even their families were murdered. In total, up to 200 people were killed in what became known as the Night of the Long Knives. The army, now satisfied that they wouldn't be replaced, pledged total allegiance to their new Führer, and Hitler's control was now absolute. Life in Germany changed violently. Freedom of the press, expression, and public assembly were suspended. Jews were initially branded and their businesses boycotted. And eventually, Hitler would go on to have 6 million Jewish men, women, and children killed in concentration camps. Hundreds of thousands of people were forced into sterilization for physical and mental imperfections. The Hitler Youth became a way to brainwash the young. Boys were trained to fight and returned home from camp violent. Girls were told their purpose was to have many pure Aryan children, and they would sometimes return from camp pregnant. When their parents were understandably horrified, their children would threaten to turn them over to the Gestapo for standing in the way of Germany's greatness. The standard greeting changed, and you could be sent to a
I guess those who get in the minds of children basically, you know, influence the future, and I think Hitler really understood that, like, yeah, we need to get them when they're young. Yeah, the Hitler Youth. I remember reading about that, like, I think there was, like, a program, we need to produce as many pure Aryan, like babies, so he would have them, like, breed to produce that, like, some of the Hitler Youth. It was wild, dude. Like, this dude was a complete menace and just awful, and arguably, like, top 5 most evil men in history, right? Like,
concentration camp for not using it. This way, it seemed like everyone was a Nazi supporter. If you dared oppose Hitler or speak out against him in any way, you also would be sent to a concentration camp. German nationalism captivated the young Adolf. Extreme ideology and anti-Semitism festered in him as a young man living a hard life on the streets. Germany's defeat in the First World War filled him with hatred and a thirst for vengeance.
Just the perfect storm.
A political movement that treated him like a god, and hundreds of thousands looking up to him as their savior made him a megalomaniac. And soon, his aggressive foreign policies would drag the world into a second tragic global conflict,
which we reacted
otherwise
to.
Known as.
Yeah. So since this video's ending, you'll probably see pop-ups right here. Check out my Oversimplified playlist wherever it pops up, and yeah, you can see my World War I and II reactions. But yeah, the man was wild. I didn't comment much because, like, I think most people already knew, like, at least a good chunk of this, but there was interesting small things to learn, like his little rise to power through politicking and some of his early childhood. So that was definitely interesting. And yeah, that's really all I gotta say, guys. I think I've already said everything I need to say. Bye, everyone.